Okay, here is the English translation, keeping everything as faithful as possibly to the original, without summarizing, rewriting, or adding anything. The format and punctuation are preserved exactly as they are. Have you ever stopped to think that perhaps everything you've been taught about that night has been filtered, translated, reinterpreted by centuries of fear, control, and oblivion? That perhaps the image you carry in your mind, the long table, the serious faces, the bread broken as a harbinger of tragedy, is not the whole truth, but only a shadow of it. You were taught to see that night as the end of something, as the prelude to the cross, as if everything there was just preparation for pain. But what if I told you that that night was not about dying? What if I told you it was about remembering, that it was about waking up, that it was about recognizing what has always been alive, pulsating present, not in a distant sky, but there, in that room, in those bodies, in that shared breath? You were taught to look at that supper as a farewell ritual, but no one told you that it was in fact a ritual of arrival, of full presence, of conscious unity. You are about to remember something that has been erased, something that institutions prefer to forget because it was too dangerous, too simply, too powerful. Something that, if remembered, would make you realize that you never needed intermediaries, that you never needed temples, that you never needed anything beyond what already exists within you. Breathe deeply now. Feel the air coming in, feel the air going out, because what I'm about to tell you is not a story that is read only with the eyes. It is a story that is remembered with the body, with the heart, with the breath. And it begins not with words written in stone, but with something much older, the silence of a room where 13 people sat down to eat bread and drink wine, and where, for a few hours, the veil between the human and the divine became so thin that it disappeared. You are not learning, you are remembering. For centuries, you have been told that that night was about betrayal, about Judas's kiss, about the bread that symbolized flesh, and the wine that symbolized blood. You were told that Jesus knew he was going to die, and that he gathered his disciples for one last melancholic meal, where he announced his end and asked them to remember him. But what they didn't tell you is that this narrative was constructed later, much later, by men who needed a story of sacrifice, because that's what made sense to them. Men who needed a martyr, because that way they could build a church around his absence. Men who transformed a living experience into a static symbol. But that night, there was no symbol. There was presence. There was no ritual. There was breath. There was no farewell. There was no farewell. There was an encounter. The Last Supper was not the end of anything. It was the culmination of everything. It was the moment when everything he had taught for years, about the kingdom within you, about the light that cannot be extinguished, about the unity of all things, was lived completely, without words, without explanations, just lived. And what was lived that night was so profound, so true, that words could never capture it. So they tried to translate it. And in the translation, something essential was lost. You need to understand, Jesus was not creating a religion. He was undoing all of them. He was not instituting a sacrament. He was showing that there is nothing sacred outside of you that isn't already inside of you. When he broke the bread, he wasn't saying, "This is my body. Remember me when I'm no longer here." He was saying, "This is presence. This is shared life." This is what happens when you stop living in the past or in the future and simply are here, now, with others, recognizing that everything that exists is sacred because you are alive to witness it. The bread was not a symbol of his body. The bread was the celebration of all the bodies present there, of all the hands that planted, harvested, netted, bags, of all the mouths that would eat, of all the lives connected in that simple act of nourishing and being nourished. When he raised the cup of wine, he wasn't asking them to drink of his future pain. He was celebrating the intoxication of present life, the sweetness of shared existence, the joy of being alive, together breathing the same air, eating from the same earth, drinking from the same fruit. That night was not dark. It was luminous. It was not about death. It was about recognizing the immortality of what is real, of what is love, of what is presence. But something happened after, something that always happens when the truth is too great to be contained. Those who came after, those who were not in that room, those who did not feel that presence, needed to explain. And when you explain, you lose. When you create dogma, you kill experience. When you transform presence into ritual, you transform fire into ashes. And that's what they did. They took that night alive, pulsating, full of laughter and tears, and deep communion, and transformed it into a symbolic event, into a ceremony that should be repeated, copied, performed. But you can't perform presence. You can't repeat a moment of total unity. You can only live it again, 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 always again, always for the first time. And that's what I was trying to show. Not do this in memory of me, but do this. Be present, be together, share, recognize, live. Now close your eyes for a moment. Breathe. Feel your body sitting where it is. Feel the weight. Feel the temperature of the air. Feel the life pulsing in you. You don't need any ritual to be present. You already are. You don't need any institution to access the divine. It's already here, breathing with you, beating in your heart, moving in your blood. That night, in the upper room, was no different. They were just people, human, tired, afraid, hopeful, doubtful, loving. Jesus wasn't a distant God. He was a man who had awakened, who had remembered, who had recognized his own nature, and was trying, with every word, with every gesture, with every breath, to make others remember too. And that night, for a few hours, they remembered. All of them, even Judas. Yes, even Judas. Because what they haven't told you about Judas is that he wasn't the villain. He was the mirror. He was the mirror. He was the part of each of us that doubts, that fears, that wants to control, that wants to force the kingdom to come before its time. Judas didn't betray Jesus. Judas tried to speed up the plan, tried to force the hand of destiny, tried to make happen what he thought should happen. And when he realized he had understood everything wrong, he wasn't able to forgive himself. But that night, before everything fell apart, Judas was there too. He also ate of the bread. He also drank of the wine. He also felt the presence. He was also loved. And that is the truth that hurts. All were loved, equally, completely, unconditionally, without exception. Because what Jesus was showing was not a selective love. It was a love that doesn't choose, that doesn't judge, that doesn't judge, that doesn't judge, that doesn't judge. That simply is. Like the sun that rises for everyone. Like the rain that falls without asking who deserves it. And here is what was erased. What was erased? What was forgotten? What was hidden? That night, there was no hierarchy. There was no master and disciples. There were equals. there were brothers, there were friends. Jesus washed their feet, remember? He didn't ask them to wash his. He didn't put himself above. He put himself below. He showed that serving is leading, that loving is healing, that recognizing the divinity in the other is recognizing your own. But when the churches were built, when the hierarchies were established, when the popes and the bishops and the priests placed themselves between you and God, they forgot that part. They forgot that Jesus spent that night saying, "There is no one between you and the source. You are the source. You are the temple. You are the bread. You are the wine. You are the life you seek." But that was dangerous. That took away their power. So they changed the story. They made him an unattainable God. They made the Supper a sacramente that could only be performed by them. They made you a sinner who needs external salvation. But you don't need it. You never needed it. Breathe again. Feel the air coming in. Feel the air going out. You are starting to remember. Not with the mind, with something deeper. With the place where all truths live before they are transformed into words. You are remembering that that night was not about creating a new religion. It was about ending the need for all of them. That bread was not sacred because it touched it. It was sacred because it was bread, because it was life, because it was the earth transformed into food. And you, by eating it, became part of that transformation. You became the earth, you became the grain, you became eternal life renewing itself in every chew, in every digestion, in every chew, in every digestion, in every cell nourished. You weren't eating a symbol, you weren't eating reality, and recognizing, finally, that you are also real as the bread, as sacred as the wine, as divine as any prophet who ever walked the earth. What happened that night was a collective awakening. For a few hours, everyone there woke up. They came out of the dream of separation. They came out of the illusion that any of them was more or less than the other. They came out of the belief that God was out there, distant, judging, waiting, and they entered into the truth that God is what happens when you are totally present, totally alive, totally here. God is not a being, God is a state of total presence, of love without defense, of recognition without judgment. And that night, they lived that state. Jesus didn't create that state. He just showed that it's possible, that it's natural, that it's what you are when you stop trying to be anything else. But you know what happens when you wake up. You scare those who are still sleeping. You threaten those who have built castles in the dream. You disturb that man feels safe in the illusion, and that's why he was killed. Not because God needed a sacrifice, but because fearful humans always kill what they can't control, always crucify what they can't control, always crucify what they can't understand. But even on the cross, even in his last breath, the message remained. Because the message was never about him. It was about you, about everyone, about the spark that cannot be extinguished, about the light that keeps shining even when the body falls, about the life that doesn't end because it never began. It always was, always is, always will be. Now imagining for a moment that you are in that room, not as an observer, but as a participant. You are sitting at that table. You smell the fresh bread. You see the wine reflecting the candlelight. You hear the sound of voices that laugh, that talk, that share stories. You look around and see faces, human faces, some young, some old, some beautiful, some marked by life, but all alive, all present. And then it looks at you, directly at you. And in that look, you don't see judgment, you don't see distance, you see recognition. It sees you, truly sees you. And in that moment, something inside you that was dormant awakens. Something that was broken becomes whole. Something that was forgotten is remembered. And you realize he's not showing you who he is. He's showing you who you are. You are that. You are that presence. You are that light. You are that light that cannot be killed because it isn't of the body. It's of what passes through the body. It's of what animates the body. It's of what animates the body. It's of what it means when everything else is gone. And then he breaks the bread, and in breaking the bread, he breaks the illusion of separation. He shows that what seems divided is, in fact, one. The bread in his hands, the bread in the mouths of everyone there, all came from the same earth. All will return to the same earth. Everything is a continuous cycle of transformation. You are not separate from the bread. You are not separate from the earth. You are not separate from anyone at that table. You are not separate from the divine. You are the divine recognizing as itself, and he drinks the wine. And then drinking is celebrates, not the pain that will come, but the joy that is, because wine is fermentation. It's the composition transformed into flavor. It's death transformed into life. It's death transformed into life. It's darkness transformed into celebration. And you are that too. You are also constant transformation. You are also death that becomes life, and in this eternal cycle, nothing is lost. Everything is transformed, and the essence remains. The essence that you are remains. Always. Breathe deeply now. Feel your chest rising. Feel your chest falling. You are in that room. You have always been in that room. Because that room is not a place. It is a state of communion, of unity, of presence, and you can enter that state now, here, where you are. You don't need any church. You don't need any priest. You don't need any priest. You don't need any ritual. You just need to stop, breathe, recognize. You just need to look around and see that everything that exists is sacred. The chair where you sit, the floor beneath your feet, the air you breathe, the people around you, everything, everything. Everything is the Last Supper happening again, because the Last Supper never ended. It was just forgotten, and now you are remembering. What really happened that night cannot be told. It can only be lived. But I can tell you what didn't happen. There was no melancholy. There was no paralyzing fear. There was no resignation. There was no resignation. There was love. Love that laughs. Love that embraces. Love that looks into your eyes and says, I see you. I recognize you. I love you not despite who you are, but because of who you are. Because you are me, and I am you, and we are that. And that love is not sweet. It's not soft. It's not soft. It's not delicate. That love is fierce. It's total. It's unconditional. It's the kind of love that destroys everything that is false, so that only the true remains. And that night, everything that was false was destroyed. All the masks fell. All the defenses crumbled. And what remained was pure presence, pure life, pure love. And here is the secret that was buried. You can live like this. You can live like this. You can live in this state, not just for one night, but always, in every meal, in every meal, in every conversation, in every breath. You can make every moment a Last Supper, a celebration of the life that is, a communion with everything that exists. You don't need to wait. You don't need to wait. You don't need to be purified. You are already poor. You are already poor. You are already complete. And when you recognize that, when you really recognize that, you become what Jesus was, not a God, but a man fully awake, fully alive, fully present, fully free. Now, put your hand on your heart. Feel it beating. That beating is the proof that you are alive, 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 the proof that you don't need any external salvation, because salvation is not a future event. Here's a translation of the provided text, adapted culturally for an English-speaking audience. I focused on making the language flow naturally and resonate with a Western, likely Christian-influenced understanding of spirituality, while staying true to the original message and tone. I haven't changed names like Jesus, as they are already deeply embedded in English-speaking culture. It is a present recognition. It is looking at your own life and saying, this is sacred, this is divine. This is what I've always been searching for. And when you say that, when you truly mean it, everything shifts. Not because the world has changed, but because you've stopped fighting against it. You've stopped trying to be something you're not. You've stopped seeking what you already possess. And in that stillness, in that silence, in that silence, in that surrender, you find what those 13 found in that room. You find peace, not the peace of the absence of problems, but the peace of complete presence. The peace that doesn't depend on anything external. The peace that is you when you stop running from yourself. What happened after that night, you already know. They took that living experience and turned it into dogma. They took that unconditional love and created conditions. They took that free presence and built prisons. But you don't have to live in those prisons. You don't have to believe the conditions. You don't have to follow the dogma. You can return. You can remember. You can enter that room again. Not physically, but essentially. Because that room exists within you. It always has. It always will. And every time you pause, breathe, recognize, you are there. Every time you break bread with someone and truly see that person, you are there. Every time you drink and celebrate being alive, you are there. Every time you love without defending, without judging, without controlling, you are there. You're not imitating Jesus. You're being what he always said you were. You're being you, complete, whole, divine. And this is the final revelation, the one they didn't want you to know, the one that was erased from the texts, twisted in the translations, buried under centuries of institutional control. You don't need anyone between you and God, because you are already the bridge. You are already the bridge. You are already the way. You are already the truth. You are already the life. Not because you're special, but because you're special. But because everyone is, because everything is, because there is nothing that isn't sacred when you truly look, when you truly see, when you truly are present. And that night, in that room, with that bread and that wine, Jesus wasn't creating something new. He was revealing something eternal, something that has always been true, something that you've always known, even if you've forgotten, and now you are remembering, not because I'm telling you, but because something within you recognizes it, something within you always knew. And that something is what's real. It's what can't be erased. It's what survives all the distortions. It's you, the real you, the eternal you, the divine you. So breathe one last time, deeply, and as you exhale, release everything you've been told you should be. Release all the stories of guilt and shame. Release all the beliefs that you need to be saved by someone out there. And recognize you are already saved. You always have been. Because you were never lost. You were just sleeping. And now you are waking up. And in this awakening, you realize that the Last Supper wasn't the last. It was the first. The first of all the times you will sit, breathe, eat, drink, love, and recognize this is sacred, this is divine, this is me. And in recognizing this in yourself, you recognize it in everyone. And in recognizing it in everyone, you become what he was. Not a savior, but someone who remembers, someone who sees, someone who loves, someone who is present. And that is all the world has ever needed. Not more religions, but more people awake, present, alive, real. And if this message has found you now, it's not a coincidence. It's because some part of you was ready to remember. And if you have remembered, let your light guide others, not by preaching, not by converting, but simply by being, being present, being love, being truth. And when someone asks why you've changed, why you shine differently, you don't need to explain. You just need to break bread with them, drink wine with them, look into their eyes and say, without words, I see you. And in that recognition, they will remember too, because we were all in that room. We all shared that supper. We all are this. We all are this. We always have been. We always will be. And now you know, not with the mind, but with the heart, with the body, with the breath, you know. And knowing this changes everything, not the world, but how you see the world. And when your vision changes, the world you see changes too. So, little by little, one awakening at a time, the kingdom spoke of becomes real, not in heaven, here, no, in you.